My parents laughed at me at my sister's engagement. Then her fiancé stood and said Dr. Abigail Carter. Honestly, I'm not sure I did either. The engagement invitation sat on my desk like a dare. Thick ivory cardstock, embossed letters shimmering faintly under the lamp, with just one impersonal name printed crisply on the front. Dr. Abigail Carter. Not Abby, not Gail. Certainly not our beloved daughter. Just my title, as if that made me easier to swallow. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd heard my parents' voices, unless you counted an accidental voicemail or an awkward mention from a distant cousin. No phone calls on my birthday, no concerned messages when I nearly collapsed from exhaustion after a 20-hour surgery. Just silence. Chilling, deliberate silence. But now, inexplicably, I received an invitation to Isabel's engagement party. A handwritten note accompanied it, bearing one word: behave. No, we miss you. No, please come home. Just that warning, sharp and concise. I turned it over slowly, puzzled about how they'd even found my hospital address. Maybe they hadn't. Perhaps a PR team at the hospital had forwarded it, or Isabel simply needed her estranged sister present to enhance her image. This wasn't reconciliation. It was theater. And I wasn't invited as family. I was invited to prove they'd done their part. People assume these kinds of revenge stories start with anger. Mine began with disbelief, then softened into a quiet, painful curiosity. Did my parents even remember the sound of my name? Outside, raindrops tapped rhythmically against my office window, as though trying to convey something I couldn't quite grasp. I leaned against the glass, gazing at the steady stream of ambulances pulling up to St. Margaret's Emergency Center. Young interns scurried past, energetic and hopeful. They hadn't yet experienced the devastation of being erased by the very people who raised them. I envied their innocence. A sharp knock disrupted my thoughts, and my nurse, Amelia, entered without hesitation. Her eyes drifted to the invitation on my desk. "You going?" she asked quietly, already knowing the answer. "Just got the invite," I replied, voice deliberately neutral. She raised an eyebrow. "Invite, huh?" I didn't respond. It wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge, a carefully laid trap. Perhaps even a warning. I hadn't decided yet if I would walk away or step directly into it. But if I chose to attend, I'd wear my white coat. Not to brag, but to remind them they could no longer dismiss me quietly. That evening, I booked my flight back to Connecticut. My hometown would greet me exactly as I remembered. Polished, pristine, picture-perfect from a distance, but suffocating up close. The kind of place that values appearances over authenticity. As I packed my suitcase, I mentally prepared myself for their cold smiles, passive-aggressive glances, and my mother's familiar scent. Expensive lavender soap disguising disdain. Yet despite everything, a stubborn curiosity pushed me forward. Perhaps finally, it was time they confronted who I'd become. The streets of Greenwich, Connecticut welcomed me like a museum exhibit. Flawlessly manicured, deliberately charming, but ultimately lifeless. Trees lined the roads with symmetrical perfection. Leaves fluttering softly, as if rehearsed. Pulling into the driveway of the house I'd once called home felt surreal. Every brick and flower bed precisely as they had been since childhood, untouched by time. Somehow, the familiarity made my chest tighten more. I paused at the door, hand hovering uncertainly before finally knocking. The scent that greeted me when the door opened was painfully familiar. Lavender soap and fresh linen. My mother, Eleanor Carter's personal signature. It was the smell of expectation and silent disapproval, a fragrance I had spent years trying to forget. My mother stood there, examining me closely. Her eyes lingered too long on my white coat and the discreet silver badge reading, Dr. Abigail Carter, Trauma Surgery Chief. She did not smile. "Abigail," she said finally, voice controlled, distant. "Please, for Isabel's sake, try not to embarrass us tonight." No greeting, no warm embrace, no pretense of joy, just a blunt directive. I nodded slightly, unwilling to dignify it with words. Inside, the house remained untouched by years and memories. Same ornate furniture, polished tables, portraits hung perfectly straight, the calculated symmetry of a home hiding its tension beneath layers of impeccable decor. 14 family members were already seated around the dinner table. and I immediately spotted the single empty chair waiting for me, positioned conspicuously near the kitchen doorway. The seat chosen precisely to ensure discomfort, too warm from the kitchen's heat, distant enough from Isabel to clarify my status. No introductions were made. No one said, "Abigail's here." I merely existed at the periphery, my white coat standing out harshly against the room's muted elegance. Cousins whispered in hushed tones, glancing sideways at me. I caught a fragment clearly. Maybe they're expecting an emergency. Quiet laughter followed, quick and cutting. I didn't flinch. If you've ever returned to a place once filled with childhood memories only to feel utterly alien, you understand. The laughter might sting, but it's the silence that truly wounds, the casual cruelty of being ignored even while standing in plain sight. Dinner passed in an unsettling blur of clinking silverware and stilted conversations. I kept my composure, the calm professionalism I'd learned in operating rooms filled with chaos. Still, beneath that composure simmered a quiet pain. How easily family could erase your presence without a second thought. As dinner concluded, everyone rose swiftly, leaving me behind as they moved toward the ballroom for the main event. No one waited or glanced back. Taking a deep breath, I adjusted my coat and prepared to enter the lion's den, silently promising myself that tonight, they'd finally see who I'd become. The ballroom looked like something out of a bridal magazine. White orchids cascading from crystal vases, gold-rimmed glassware perfectly aligned, and an ice sculpture of intertwined initials, I and L, Isabel and Lucas. Everything screamed curated elegance. Everything, that is, except the seating chart. A large easel displayed the names and table assignments near the entrance. I stepped toward it calmly, scanning the list. Table 1, Isabel Carter and Lucas Brennan. Table 2, Eleanor and Thomas Carter. Tables 3 through 7, friends, cousins, family friends. My eyes drifted further down. Table 12, A, Carter. No doctor, no Abigail. Just an abbreviation, tucked discreetly next to the catering door. I stared at it for a beat too long. The placement wasn't random. It never was. These things were planned, designed, intentional. The napkin at my assigned seat was slightly off-white, noticeably different from the rest. Not a mistake. A message. A reminder that I did not belong. I sat anyway. No one came to join me. A few guests passed by, glanced at my coat, then quickly looked away. I was clearly labeled. An outlier. The estranged one. The awkward sister who had the nerve to return. And then Isabel appeared. She floated across the room in her designer gown like she was gliding through air itself, pausing at each group to soak in admiration and compliments. Perfect makeup, flawless posture, that carefully rehearsed charm she'd mastered since childhood. When she finally reached my table, she leaned down with a tight smile. I told them not to make it too clinical looking on your side, she whispered, her eyes skimming my coat. Hope the place card isn't too sterile for your taste. Then she walked away before I could answer, already laughing with her bridesmaids. I wasn't surprised. She had always been the golden one. The child who performed ballet recitals while I was dissecting frogs. The one who brought home trophies for charm while I brought home lab samples. She'd won them with ease. Our parents, the neighbors, even teachers. I wasn't angry about it anymore, but I wasn't going to pretend either. The toasts began shortly after. My father stood and toasted new beginnings. My mother followed with a thin smile and added, to loyalty, grace, and knowing your place in the family. She never looked in my direction. Then Isabel took the microphone. Champagne flute in hand, she twirled slightly, playing to the cameras. And to think, she said sweetly, even my big sister made it tonight. All the way from wherever she stitches people up now. The room erupted into laughter. Full-bodied, delighted laughter. No one flinched. No one paused. Because to them it was a harmless joke. A punchline in heels. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. Instead, I rose slowly, lifted my untouched glass, and spoke clearly. The people I stitch back together, I said, fight harder than anyone in this room has ever dared. And just like that, the laughter stopped. Not because they understood, but because for the first time, they didn't know what box to put me in. I set the glass down, and I waited, because I knew what was coming. The silence after my words didn't come from shock. It came from confusion. I had shifted the script, and now no one knew what role I was playing. Then, from across the ballroom, I saw him. Lucas. He stood near the main table, just behind Isabel's chair. His jaw was tight, his posture stiff, too stiff for a man simply trying to celebrate an engagement. His eyes met mine, locked for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. Then he moved. Deliberate. Unhurried. He weaved through the guests, past whispering aunts, tight-lipped cousins, and friends who didn't dare look in my direction. My mother reached out as he passed, muttering something with urgency, but he ignored her. Isabel turned halfway in her seat, her perfect curls bouncing as her brow furrowed in confusion. He stopped 2 feet from me, not close enough to be casual, not far enough to be dismissive. Then he straightened his back and addressed the room. Not me, the room. "This woman," he said, voice calm, steady, "is Dr. Abigail Carter. She is the trauma surgeon who saved my life 2 years ago during the Boston Metro collapse. I was trapped, bleeding out." She didn't hesitate. She didn't ask if I was important, she just saved me. Gasps rippled across the tables. I didn't look at Isabel, but I heard her sharp inhale. "She is not just my fiancé's sister," Lucas continued, now facing the crowd. "She's the reason I'm standing here today. And the fact that any of you thought she should be seated by the kitchen is shameful." The room froze. Isabel dropped her glass. It hit the floor with a dull thud and rolled to the side. No one moved to pick it up. My mother stood abruptly. "This is not the time, Lucas." He turned to her, his voice still even. "No, Mrs. Carter, this is exactly the time." Then he looked at me again, eyes steady with something I hadn't seen all night. Truth. "Dr. Carter," he said formally, and then he extended his hand. I didn't take it. I didn't need to. Instead, I nodded once and stepped forward, into the silence, into the realization washing over everyone in that opulent room. I wasn't a side character in their story. I wasn't a prop for their perfect night. I was the moment they couldn't erase. And they had no idea what was about to come next. Lucas stepped back, giving me the floor, not by gesture, but by presence. No one said a word. No one moved. The chandeliers flickered faintly above us, casting halos over a room frozen in collective realization. Then slowly, a figure from the back stood up. It was Dr. Wallace Grant, former director of Boston Mercy, a man whose name carried weight in every hospital in the state. He nodded at me with a look of quiet reverence, then placed a hand over his chest. "I was in that ER that night," he said, voice calm but resolute. "I saw her lead a collapsing team, direct a 10-hour surgical rotation, and stabilize 7 critical patients without stopping to breathe. She's not just a surgeon. She's a force." People turned. Murmurs spread like spilled wine across white linen. Another figure stood. This one I didn't know. A woman in her 60s, navy suit, silver streak in her hair. "I was a nurse in that trauma wing for 30 years, she said. "We don't forget the ones who carry others on their back." And then a third. This time, a quiet man at table 6. "My son made it because of her. He still walks because of her." It was like watching a wall crumble. One by one, voices rose. Not loud, not confrontational, just certain. My mother sat down slowly. Isabel stayed frozen in her seat, pale, shaking. Her entire image, perfect sister, adored fiancé, center of attention, was fracturing in front of her, and she knew it. Someone near the stage tried to resume the music, but it died before the chorus began. The energy had shifted, the illusion had cracked, and all I had done was stand there. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, they saw me not through the lens of resentment or rivalry, but for who I truly was. The girl they tried to silence had become the woman too powerful to ignore. Lucas turned once more and said simply, "She's family. Start treating her like it, or don't expect me at the wedding." Then he walked back to the main table and sat alone in Bob's, and I remained standing, Not for attention, not for revenge, but because I had earned my place, and I wasn't giving it back. The lounge just off of the main ballroom was dimly lit. Velvet chairs, low lamps, a heavy silence. The kind of room where hard truths could slip out without witnesses. Eleanor Carter sat stiffly across from me in a dove gray cardigan and pearl-buttoned blouse, her expression tightly composed as always. She didn't reach for me. She didn't smile. "You certainly made a statement tonight," she said after a moment, her tone neutral but sharp. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She took a sip of her untouched coffee, now cold. "The media's already stirring. Some of the coverage is flattering. Some of it, less so." Still nothing from me. I had no interest in salvaging her image. "I wasn't prepared," she continued, voice low. "None of us were. Not Isabel, not even your father, if he were still with us." "Isabel fainted?" I said flatly. She blinked. "She has sensitivities. To truth?" I asked, letting the silence drag. "Or to not being the center of the universe for once?" Eleanor's hand tensed on her cup. "I didn't come here to argue." "Then why did you come?" I asked, leaning back. She hesitated, then pulled a folded slip of paper from her purse and slid it across the table. "I thought maybe you could issue a clarifying statement, something measured, neutral, just to reframe the narrative." There it was. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You want me to make a public statement, not to correct a lie, but to cushion your discomfort?" Her lips tightened. "You have to understand. We didn't mean to hurt you. We were just trying to protect Isabel. You were always different. Louder." "I wasn't loud," I said, voice steady. "I was visible, and you hated that." I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin folder. Quietly, I slid it toward her. She didn't touch it, but she looked down. "That," I said, "is the anonymous complaint filed with the state board 5 years ago, accusing me of falsifying surgical outcomes, of medical negligence. It delayed my certification. I almost lost my license." Her face paled. I turned to the next page. "And this is a forensic linguistics report. Matches the writing style to 2 contributors. 94% match. Isabel Carter. Secondary contributor, Eleanor Carter." She didn't speak, but the tremble in her fingers betrayed everything. I could have sued. I should have. But I didn't, because even then I hoped I was wrong. Her voice cracked. "You don't understand. Isabel couldn't compete with you. She needed something, anything, to be seen." "She didn't need to compete," I said sharply. "She just needed to show up. And you made sure I was too buried to be noticed." For the first time, her eyes filled, but no tears fell. And I realized they never had. Not for me. She reached a hand across the table, unsure, half-hearted. "I never wanted to lose you," she whispered. "You didn't lose me," I said. "You gave me away, then convinced yourself I'd walked off." The silence between us stretched, thick with everything that had never been said. My mother's hand still hovered, suspended between regret and habit, but it never touched me. Not once. And I realized, after all these years, she didn't know how. "I made choices," she said quietly, as if confession could erase consequences. "So did I replied. "But I was the one who paid for yours." Her shoulders sagged, cardigan folding in at the seams like she was caving inward. "We were trying to protect the family's image. You were so driven, so visible, it intimidated people." "I didn't ask to be worshipped," I said, calm but clear. "I just wanted to be treated like I mattered. And instead of lifting me up, you tried to bury me, professionally, socially, even legally." She flinched, not at the words, but at how quiet I remained while saying them. I stood slowly, deliberately. "You're right about one thing," I said, gathering the folder. "I was driven, and now that drive has carried me far enough to see exactly what I left behind." "Abigail," she started, but I held up a hand. "I'm not going to release a statement. I'm not going to play damage control for the sake of your country club brunches. What happened tonight was truth, unedited, and I'm not going to apologize for it." Her mouth tightened. The pearls at her collar reflected the dim light, polished but cold. I picked up my coat and turned to the door. "Wait," she said suddenly. "If anyone asks, what should I tell them? Why you stopped coming around?" I paused, hand resting on the doorframe, back to her. "Tell them the truth," I said. "Tell them I didn't disappear. I was erased, slowly, carefully, and when I realized it, I chose to stay gone." I walked out before she could answer. Because the thing about betrayal from your own family is, it doesn't always come with screaming or slammed doors. Sometimes it's the quiet reassigning of chairs, the cold edits of a seating chart, the passive removal of a name from a conversation, but silence is still violence. And walking away? It wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. As I stepped into the cool night air, a breeze lifted the edge of my coat. The stars above Greenwich blinked faintly, uncaring of the name that no longer held me hostage. For the first time in years, I didn't look back. The Pacific air felt different, cleaner somehow, like it didn't carry expectations. My small home sat perched on a hillside outside Carmel by the sea, with a view that stretched endlessly into the horizon. No headlines, no tight smiles, no one asking me to shrink so someone else could shine. I stood barefoot on the deck that morning, sipping coffee as the sunlight spilled across the water. My white coat was gone, traded for linen and silence. I wasn't hiding. I was healing. The video clip from the engagement party had gone viral within days. Over 4.2 million views. The caption read, "They laughed at her until the groom said, 'Dr. Abigail Carter.'" I never reposted it, never commented, never explained. I didn't need to. It wasn't the moment that mattered. It was what came after. I received letters, dozens of them, from nurses, EMTs, young residents who'd been told to dim their brilliance for the comfort of others, from veterans, from siblings, from daughters. One wrote, "You reminded me I'm not invisible." Another said, "I walked away, and for the first time it didn't feel like quitting. It felt like choosing me." The hospital board reached out 2 weeks later. They wanted me to return to take over as Director of Trauma Development. A title, a raise, a corner office. I said no. Instead, I opened something of my own. The Carter Initiative, a support network and legal resource for medical professionals who've been targeted by familial sabotage. Spouses, parents, even siblings. We don't just fight to restore licenses or reputations. We teach them to own their worth out loud. Because sometimes the bloodiest battles don't happen in operating rooms. They happen at dining tables, in silent car rides, at family celebrations where your name is spoken like a stain. Months passed, and then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. The slant of the cursive told me who it was from before I even unfolded it. My mother. "I saw your interview on PBS. I didn't realize how far you'd climbed. I wish I'd seen you then." But that's the thing. She did see me. She just didn't want to. And now, she doesn't get access to who I've become. Not because I hate her, not because I want revenge, but because I finally love myself enough to choose distance, without guilt. That's the part they never tell you. Healing isn't loud. It doesn't require permission. It comes quietly, like morning light through salt-swept windows. This morning, a girl from the local bakery delivered fresh sourdough and smiled shyly. "Were you really a surgeon?" she asked in a small voice. I smiled. "Once," I said. "Now I help others survive the things no scalpel can fix." She grinned, waved, and ran off, barefoot and laughing. I turned back toward the sea. And for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. If you've ever walked away, not to hurt them, but to finally protect yourself, tell me you're here. Just that. A single word, a breath. I'll read them all. And if this story found you at the right time, thank you for not letting them erase you.